Well, hello everybody, how are you doing this fine day? I hope you're enjoying your week. Welcome to another survival challenge. And today's survival challenge, we're doing hunters and hunting and survival and wilderness shit. That's fun, right? That's something a little different. Now, to address the fat, disgusting elephant in the room. Most of the time when I make these videos, I make them about challenges and characters and universes that I really enjoy, that I like. That's like 95% of the time. But every once in a while, I make a survival challenge of a universe or a character that I really don't like. I would suggest checking out my Mortal Kombat survival challenge to get an idea of what that might look like. And while I very much do like Horizon Zero Dawn, I think it's a pretty cool game with a cool premise, some cool characters, and all that good stuff. Horizon Forbidden West is a massive flaming pile of shit that was dumped on the forehead of your dying mother as she gave her last words to you, completely ruining that fucking moment. How disrespectful. I don't know what these guys were thinking. I mean, they had a pretty cool game, and then they're like, hey, let's do that again, but without the cool part. And in that 5% of the time when I come across these things that I don't like, I find it very difficult to not roast the fuck out of them. So while I have no idea what I'm going to say in this video, because these are always non-scripted, that's definitely going to be a part of it. So, you know, just be prepared for that. But I'm wasting enough of your time. Let's get started. So originally I was going to do what I normally do in these types of videos, where I basically spend this first section going over the world and the history and telling you a little bit about this universe that I'm about to dump these characters into. But as I was about to do this, my PTSD kicked in, and I remembered how mind-numbingly boring it was for me to sit through this game and have the game itself explain all this shit to me. And I just decided I'm not going to inflict that horrors upon a bunch of random people. Like, how cruel can you be? Okay, just let's get into this. So in the first Horizon game, you start off as a character named Aloy. And for whatever reason, you're on a planet that is basically dominated by a bunch of robot dinosaurs for some reason. And for the vast majority of it, the game does not explain how or why the world got this way. Until towards the end of the game, where you go on this mission where you go into this underground facility kind of cave thing, and it finally explains everything to you, and it is easily the worst mission in the game. It's the most boring mission, and it's awful. What they do is they lock in this underground facility where you have to go room to room and just have holograms appear and explain shit to you about the world and the past and how the world got to this point. It's very long. It's like the length of a whole fucking movie, and there's no real gameplay. It's just them explaining shit to you as you walk through this underground cavern. It sucks, but it's forgivable because it's literally one mission in the entire several dozen hour long game. So it's not really that big of a deal. And I was mostly okay with it because they came up with this super complicated story, and I would have preferred them just shove it into one mission rather than constantly beating me over the head with it throughout the entire game and ruining the story outside of this one single mission. And then Horizon Forbidden West came out, and they decided that that just wasn't enough info. We weren't done with you. We're gonna add a bunch more details into this that you didn't know, that you probably should have known in the first game, but whatever. And then we're gonna add whole new plot points. All the shit you learned in the first game, that's just like 1/4 of the information that you really have to actually know. And we're gonna take all of this added information and we're going to just fucking feed it to you for 1/3 of the runtime of the entire game. For 1/3 of the story of this game, it's just you talking to fucking holograms and people just explaining shit to you so that this convoluted ass story makes sense. It is so dull and boring and uninteresting and bad, and most other negative words I can use to describe how a story is written, you can use to describe this. And it affects the game in so many other ways than just making it boring. The character writing takes a massive hit from the first game because there's more characters in this game that have a larger role in the story than they did in the first game. But every time those characters are there, instead of taking the story and having these characters interact and build bonds and friendships and fall in love and like build as characters, they spend all their time just explaining shit to each other. It's just exposition after exposition throughout the whole goddamn game. And it's not even good exposition, because by the end of the game, there's so much information that you've been lodged with, most people still don't know what the fucking game's about. It's so convoluted. The story of this game could have been so simple. You got this asshole guy, Pharaoh, who lived 1,000 years ago, who made this military weapon that were a bunch of these robot dinosaur things. Super goofy, but whatever, it's fine, it works. And then he lost control of them because there was a glitch in the system. They took over the planet, so humanity decided in response to create an AI known as Gaia, whose whole goal was to rebuild the planet and retake back control over the machines, but they couldn't do it at that time because it was too late. It was going to take several generations in order to do that. So they basically just resided themselves to their fate and hoped that in the future, after they were all long dead, the world can build itself. Then, 1,000 years later, Aloy, a totally random native girl, comes across this little piece of technology, and she learns about it and learns more about it than anybody else does, and basically becomes the hero that will stop the destruction of the world and rebuild the planet. There's nothing wrong with that. It's super goofy, but it works just fine. But that's not what they did. They added so much extra bullshit that's not necessary. Gaia is not just one AI that's there to protect the world. Gaia actually split into like 8 different AIs, and each one of those AIs became sentient, and each of them feed into the plot of the story in some different way. Aloy, the main character, is not some random native girl who came across this technology. She's actually also a clone of the chick who built Gaia 1,000 years ago, and she just so happened to come across this earpiece that allowed her to learn about this being a threat in the first place. The people who all resided themselves to die 1,000 years ago, well, actually that wasn't everybody. A large portion of them actually went into a bunch of spaceships and left the fucking planet. And then as they were off the planet for 1,000 years, they evolved, became immortal, got a bunch of crazy advanced technology, and then came back to the Earth to start a bunch of problems and add a whole new different plot point to the story. Also, by the way, the evil AI that's been controlling the Pharaoh machines this whole time, Hades, there's another one out in space that's coming to Earth called Nemesis that was created by somebody totally different. That's like, it's just, what is happening? Why did you do this? It didn't make your game better. It made you have to take hours upon hours of time of gameplay explaining this shit to me, completely killing the pacing of your game, confusing the shit out of your entire player base, and eating into valuable story time that should have been used in building your characters and world. This is all just related to fucking backstory. That is absolutely insane. And the crazy part is that all this story and exposition solely exists to push an incredibly invasive and preachy and insulting political message. And it's not insulting because the political message itself is insulting. It's insulting because of how preachy and condescending it is, but also because it's not just one political message. It's like 6 goddamn political messages. Just pick 1, 2 maximum. Now, don't get me wrong, the first game had its political messaging. And it was fine. It wasn't too evasive. It was there. It's cool. Just because you have a political message doesn't make your game worse. When The Last of Us Part 2 came out, there were a lot of people that had issues with that game, but it was mostly due to how it was basically misery porn, and they didn't like that he killed off Joel, and they didn't like Abby because you had to play as the character that killed off Joel. That was mostly the issues with that game. That game had some pretty hardcore political messaging that most people didn't really care all that much about, because it wasn't really that evasive as you were playing it. It was there, and it was fine, but it wasn't insulting the intelligence of the people playing the game. I have my issues with The Last of Us Part 2, but that's not one of them. Forbidden West is the quintessential example of how to do that shit so goddamn poorly. This game pushes an environmental political message, an anti-capitalist political message, an anti-religion political message, a feminist political message, a classism political message, a political message about anti-prejudice. I could keep going. None of it is told well or blended into the story in a natural way, and they don't have anything to say about it that's new or interesting. They just keep randomly forcing in here at points out of fucking nowhere, and it's weird. For example, you know that other evil AI named Nemesis that's out in space that's coming towards Earth that I talked about earlier? It's stated in the game that that's all of humanity's prejudices shoved into a single AI. Every time they talk about this fucking thing, they talk about oppression and its hatred for things that are different than itself. I don't use the word cringe like ever, but that's a pretty fitting word to use here, I would think. Like, seriously, what were they thinking? When people talk about how a lot of video games nowadays are being created specifically by activists and not people who want to make art and are basing that art in their political beliefs, this is the type of shit they're talking about. This game was made by activists, and it was made very poorly by activists. Every single thing that was in the first game is made worse in this game. Whether you take the story, the themes, the messaging, even the gameplay and the in-game economy is fucking broken in this game. And it seems to be that somewhere along the line of making the first game and making this game, there was some sort of shift in ideology or thought process when it came to making the game that just put it on a path of fucking destruction. Like, for instance, in the DLC that came out for Forbidden West, they decided to make Aloy a lesbian. Now, generally speaking, I don't care about the sexual orientation of fictional characters. I think it's a little weird that pretty much every main female character in video games right now is a lesbian. I do find that a little odd. Like, the only one I could think of currently that isn't is Bayonetta. But like, all the major ones are, whether it's Ellie from The Last of Us, Aloy, they just made Lara Croft a lesbian. Like, they just seem to be making everybody lesbians. And that's not me hating on gay people. Like, if they made all females in games Jews, I'd have the same reaction. Like, Jews are a rather small percentage of the population, so why are there so many of them in games? There should be like a Jew here and there, and it should be the same way with lesbians. There should be a lesbian here and there, but when you start making every female that appears in the game a lesbian, it just gets weird. There's only actually one other time where I thought making a character gay was really, really bad for the story and actually hurt that thing itself. Like, it would have been better if that character was straight, and that was Mizarek from Castlevania Nocturne Season 1. I think it completely ruined the themes of the story by making Mizarek gay. It made no sense. And if you want to see me talk more about that, I made a whole video going over every season of Castlevania and discussing that. So here's a link to that. But I gotta say, this is the second time where, yeah, this was dumb. It's not like the whole time Aloy didn't have any sort of romance going on in the first two games, and then all of a sudden it was like revealed that she was gay. That would be weird enough. There was a would they, want they love triangle in the first and second game. And the game made it relatively clear that she wasn't reciprocating those feelings because she had a job to do that was more important than her own personal wants and desires. But everyone who was playing the game could clearly see that at some point she's gonna wind up with one of these two guys. And then they come up with a DLC where she winds up with this totally random chick they just introduced into the game, and it was like, what was the point in the would they, won't they stuff in the first two games? It's not like we just imagined that shit. The game developers actually wrote it into the game that she was clearly attracted to one of, if not both of these men. And they are clearly attracted to her, but now with her getting with this girl in the DLC, it kind of feels like a retcon. Even if they didn't mean it to be a retcon, it feels like it. And that's really all that matters. Also, to some extent, I've always kind of thought that the two main dudes in the love triangle are kind of pathetic because they're constantly chasing out this girl who's clearly not reciprocating their feelings because she's too busy or whatever. But now that it's actually been revealed that she likes this other chick and she's getting with her, it makes these two dudes seem even more pathetic because now she didn't even like them like that. It turns them from characters who are sort of suffering from kind of like puppy love and want to be there for this girl who they have feelings for, but they know just can't reciprocate right now, to them literally just being slaves who are chasing this chick who will never be with them at all, but who clearly want to be with her. It's just weird. Like, I don't like either of these two guys. They're allowing Aloy to walk all over them throughout two games now. And I'm not necessarily blaming Aloy for this. It's not her fault. It would be theirs. But because she doesn't actually end up with either of them in the love triangle, it just makes their characters less respectable. It's just weird and creepy and pathetic. And I don't like them. But honestly, if I was listening to every single thing I didn't like about this game, I'd be talking for like an hour. All you need to know about this game is I'm taking a bunch of survivors and I'm chucking them down to the planet, and they have to survive here with a bunch of robot dinosaurs that survive off of eating biomass, and they're gonna have to do so the exact same way that Aloy did, which is essentially they're not going to have unlimited resources, and they're going to have to use the land and what is around them in order to properly survive on this world. So like, for instance, Titus is in this video. Titus will have his gun when he arrives on the planets, but once he's out of ammunition, that's it. If he doesn't have any gun forging skills or ammunition creating skills, and he doesn't have the materials to make them, he's not gonna have any more bullets. He's gonna have to survive off the land just like Aloy did. And he's gonna have to do it with the reverse handicap that he, unlike Aloy, does not get to use the power of feminism. First up on the chopping block, we have Boba Fett from the Star Wars series. Originally, long time ago, Boba Fett was a little child who was a clone of a bigger dude. And then he was doing this whole clone child thing, and then the bigger dude who he was a clone of, who was kind of like his dad, got killed by having his head chopped off. And then Boba was like, I'm gonna get revenge. But then eventually the guy who chopped his dad's head off died by a totally different dude. And he was like, oh, fuck, what do I do now? And then he just became a bounty hunter like his dad was. And then he was eventually swallowed by a thing. And then he was not swallowed by a thing. And then he became an old man with a stick. The story of Boba Fett, everybody. So Boba Fett is actually very difficult to talk about what he would do when he arrives on the planet, because he's so inconsistently written in the Star Wars universe. And you can't even really argue this. There are multiple Star Wars encyclopedias that have come out, and some of those encyclopedias will say that he has no code of honor, and the other ones will say that he does, because it really just depends on who's writing him to whether or not he has a code of honor when it comes to his bounty hunting. He's that inconsistent that the officially released encyclopedias can't straight up tell you what kind of character he is. And he's gone through so many different variations of story types, and his behavior changes so erratically in those story types just based on whatever writer needs him to behave at whatever time. Like I said, originally after his dad died, he was on the fucking warpath wanting revenge, and then he just kind of gave up. He's worked for people as straight up evil as Darth Vader and the fucking Empire that likes to destroy planets and kill billions of people at a time, as well as being this sort of supportive, kind, old, wise monk guy. It's actually so bad that in the book of Boba Fett, they actually had to go back and write in a story where his actual mindset changes. The whole thing where he meets up with the Tusken Raiders, and the Tusken Raiders teach him their ways and make him be a good person. And that was the show's whole way of sort of explaining why his character is so inconsistent, by having this sort of one instance that explained his flip-flop. It still doesn't really explain it, because the stories that have him have a code of honor and the stories that have him not having a code of honor, there isn't like a point where it changes. It's just sort of randomly throughout his history. And also they kind of created another issue when they tried to make the Tusken Raiders good guys, because the Tusken Raiders have always been vicious, violent, animalistic killers. Star Wars has some problems, guys. Yeah, I know. I'm the first person to ever say that, right? Point is, what these videos are about, which is taking a bunch of random characters, chucking them down to a planet to see how they will interact with that environment and story, is kind of hard to do with Boba Fett, because I don't know. But luckily for this particular challenge, it doesn't really matter, because Boba's not living very long. So for people who aren't super well versed in Star Wars, the guns and the jetpack and the grenades and all the different stuff that Boba Fett uses, they're not like unlimited. Blasters in Star Wars don't have unlimited ammo. They hold about 500 rounds, I think, something like that. I might be wrong. It's a decent amount, but they're limited, which means if Boba Fett crash lands on the planet and has no way to get off the planet and has to just survive there, eventually he's gonna run out of ammunition, he's gonna run out of fuel for his jetpack, he's gonna run out of everything. And the main issue he's gonna run into is that he's not a tech expert. He doesn't know anything about technology, and we don't really see him as much of a survivalist either. He's a bounty hunter. He buys his guns, he gets in his ship, he flies where he needs to, he captures someone, and then he brings them back. There's really no evidence in all of Star Wars that if he ran out of weapons, he'd be able to craft some new great weapon to help him fight against the things that he's going to come across on this planet. There's also no evidence that he'll be able to survive for long periods of time in an area with very little food, where he constantly has to survive against giant robot dinosaurs. I mean, shit, even if he didn't run out of all his resources, do you really see this motherfucker fighting a 4-story tall robot dinosaur? I don't even see him fighting one of the smaller ones like a Ravager. Ravager's probably about the size of, I don't know, maybe like a trailer, but it's a giant robot saber-tooth that runs and kills things about as fast as you would expect a giant robot saber-tooth to do that. His little blaster bolts and tiny grenades aren't gonna do a whole lot of damage to it. And before you say, well, hold up, Rouga, Aloy's capable of hurting these things with regular arrows. No, they're not regular arrows. They're arrows that are made out of the same substance the armor of the machine she fights against are made out of. And even then, if you use them on anything other than the very smallest machines, the very smallest machines, while also hitting them in their weak points, by the way, it does virtually no fucking damage. When you start fighting the bigger robots, you need massive explosive weaponry. Even Boba Fett's strongest shit doesn't really get to that point, and once he runs out of resources, he won't be able to replenish it, and he won't be able to make new ones. So, he's done. That's it. Honestly, I don't even think he'd be all that useful in terms of being a bounty hunter on this planet. Pretty much every time we see him tracking anybody in the Star Wars universe, he's using some form of technology to track them in some way. Technology that he cannot build himself or repair if something happens to it. He's a bounty hunter that we haven't even seen properly be able to track things without the use of some kind of sci-fi bullshit. He's awful. I don't understand how anyone can say he's the greatest bounty hunter in the galaxy. The bar for bounty hunter in this universe is stupidly low. Next up, we have a Yautijinaz from a Predator series. So I have to start this section off with a bit of a caveat. Unlike Boba Fett, where we know for a fact that he does not have any tech skills, like we've actually seen examples of him not being tech savvy throughout the course of his story. With the Predators, we don't actually know. Like, we don't know if each individual Yemen actually has tech expertise over their own equipment. A part of me wants to assume yes. Like, have you ever seen a yo-yo scientist? Does that even exist? Who makes these motherfuckers weapons? I don't really think it's that much of a leap in logic to make that because the Yosefets are dropped down to a planet to just survive for sometimes weeks, maybe even months at a time in order to hunt down a specific prey, that they have the ability to fix their own equipment. We already know that they at least somewhat have medical expertise and can actually heal their own wounds and help themselves in that way. So I really don't see why they wouldn't be able to do the same thing with their weapons. So I'm going to go into this part of the challenge under the assumption that they actually do have some sort of tech skills. But just know that it is possible that I'm totally full of shit. So having said that, how will they do in the Horizon universe? And I think they're going to do particularly poorly because of really two reasons. One reason is that obviously their culture and just who they are in general, predators, their whole thing is about hunting the most difficult prey they possibly can. This automatically means that they will be compelled to go after the most dangerous things that exist on this planet, putting themselves in the most dangerous situations they can possibly be in. That on its own is pretty goddamn damning, considering just how powerful some of these machines are. I mean, we've seen predators be overcome by regular people and pretty small, weak type of aliens. I mean, even going to the non-canon shit with like AVP, an alien queen can do a shit ton of damage to a predator or even a group of predators. And an alien queen is like a fraction of the size of some of these machines. These things are like 4 or 5 stories tall and they're covered in plated armor. But this actually does make me think a little bit and kind of want to go back for a second to Boba Fett. I am willing to change my mind on Boba Fett if Boba Fett is willing to basically not go out looking for trouble when he arrives to the planet. Like, would Boba Fett be okay getting to the planet and then just chilling in one of the towns and not leaving it and not going after and fighting all these robot machine things? If he can do that, then he'll probably live just fine. It'll be a boring life, but he'll live it. The reason why I couldn't really say that in his section is because, again, he's very inconsistent, and I don't really know what he wants. We know that what he does is bounty hunting. So I just assumed that when he goes there, he's probably going to continue some form of bounty hunting as well. And in the world of Horizon, there does exist bounties for certain types of machines. So I figured that he would just pick up that job title there. But I'm going to leave that up to the massive Boba Fett fans. Do you guys think that he's the type of person that if a bounty is just clearly out of his scope, he just won't go for it, and he'll be perfectly okay living his life just being kind of a chill dude and fighting weaker beings the whole time? If he can do that, he'll be okay. I'm just not entirely sold that that's what he's going to do, because you don't become known as the greatest bounty hunter in the entire galaxy by, you know, not going after the best bounties, obviously. Anyway, back to the Urameshis. The second thing that's going to be a massive issue for him is a pretty obvious one, his sight. Now, pretty much everyone who's ever seen a Predator movie knows that he has thermal vision. And a lot of people mistakenly think that this means that he can only see things if they have heat signatures. That's actually not true and not how thermal vision works. Or at least not how a Predator's thermal vision works. No, the weakness of their vision is not they can only see heat. It's that they have trouble distinguishing two different things that are of similar heat signatures. So basically, if they're out somewhere in like a winter environment, and there's two things that are next to each other that are both super fucking cold, but one's way colder than the other one, they can see and distinguish those two things. But if they're of similar temperatures, then they have trouble distinguishing them. And even if they are similar temperatures, it becomes much harder for them to see it, but they can still see motion. That's why in the Predator movies, if you've ever seen it, when Arnold covers himself in mud, every time the Predator looks in his direction, he has to like hug a tree or kind of be up against something. Like he can't just run around freely as long as he's got the mud on his body, because the Predator would be able to see that motion. It's difficult for them to discern things, but they can still see it. Having said that, I still think it's going to be a problem because none of these machines have proper heat signatures the same way that a human or a biological creature would. They may have parts inside of them that are heated, like possibly their energy source or something might have a heat signature, but their whole body doesn't. Which means while the Predator will be able to see it while it's in motion, he won't be able to see it very well. And that's still gonna be a massive issue that he's going to constantly have to deal with every time he goes on a hunt on this planet. He literally will struggle to see all of his enemies. And I'm not saying that I don't think he won't be able to overcome someone with this weakness. He will. I just think it's only a matter of time, having this weakness all the time, that it'll eventually get him killed. I mean, can you imagine this guy being surrounded by like 10 small machines or 2 or 3 massive machines, all of which he can just kind of barely see? Now, he does have other types of visions. Like, for instance, he has an electrical vision that actually allows him to see electrical signals. And if he uses this vision, he'll be able to see them, all of them. The problem with that vision is that electrical signals is the only thing he can see. So, for instance, if he turns it on and starts looking at a machine and that machine shoots a projectile at him, he won't see the projectile flying unless it has an electrical signal through it, which it wouldn't. He also would have a very hard time seeing his environment, as, again, all it does is show him electrical signals and nothing else. So it's not the most viable option for combat. His only really good option for combat will be the thermal vision, in which he'll have a very, very difficult time actually keeping track of anything with his eyes while in that form. So if it wasn't for these two pretty massive weaknesses, I actually think there's an argument to be made that he would do rather well. Not only will his technology be pretty decent, specifically his plasma caster will actually do solid damage against the machines, but he actually has the tech know-how to repair the things he has, as well as possibly making new things based on the technology that he gets from the creatures. The real problems here is him trying to put himself in harm's way constantly, because it's a part of his culture, and the fact that he can't really see his enemies all that well. Because of those two things, it's just a matter of time before he gets overcome and taken out. Because when you look at the absolute strongest machines in Horizon, they're really things that we've just never seen a Predator overcome. I mean, there's a giant mechanical bird that fires lightning from the sky. What's a fucking yodeler gonna do to that? Next up, we got Titus from Warhammer 40k Space Marine. And you might be asking, Rouga, why is Titus on here? He's not even really a hunter. Did you only put him on here so you could see him fight a giant robot? Yes, that is exactly why he's on here. Stop asking stupid questions. So how would this 9-foot-tall monstrosity do if you dropped him down into the world of Horizon? And this is where I kind of have to humble this dude a little bit, because people talk about the Warhammer universe like it is the strongest fucking universe in all of fiction. It's not. It's not even close. People need to relax, okay? And one of the things they say to over-exaggerate its power is by saying that the chain sword is a sword that can cut through molecules. It completely negates durability and slices through literally any substance as if it's butter, and this is bullshit. As described in the lore of Warhammer 40k, it is a monomolecular blade. That does not mean that it slices between molecules. That means that the tip of the blade is the width of a molecule. Now, this is important because the smaller the tip and the less area that it covers when it hits something, the more force you're applying to the thing that you're hitting. Which means a monomolecular weapon is applying an insane level of force. That doesn't mean it negates durability. It's just enhancing the force more than normal. It's like if you were to punch someone in the face and then put like a spike on your fist and then punch someone, you're going to apply more pressure because now you're going on that little spike as opposed to it going across your whole fist. Now take that same concept but multiply it by an insane degree, because the tip is literally the width of a single molecule. But it's not unlimited. There's still a limit to the amount of force that you can actually apply. And there are still things that the Space Marines struggle to cut through, and the force of which they swing the sword is still a factor of what they can cut through and what they can't. So let's just make that clear immediately. Having said that, will the Space Marines be able to use the chainsword to cut through basically any machine in Horizon? Yeah. Yeah, pretty much all of them. There's a ton of them that have very, very thick plated armor that you have to throw a ton of damage into in order to properly break down that armor, but it really just doesn't compare to something that the chainsword is capable of. When Titus swings his chainsword at one of these enemies, they'll be getting hit harder than anything that even exists within their world. And that's if Titus wasn't a 9-foot tall Goliath with super strength. Having said that, that doesn't mean Titus gets off scot-free. All the machines within Horizon are still very capable of harming Titus. In fact, I would argue there's not a single one that can't. And before people start saying, well, the armor of the fucking dudes is like super indestructible and shit. Bro, in Space Marine 2, one of the Space Marines gets killed by a small grenade. He's fully armored, wearing a helmet and everything, and it just completely blows him to shit. So stop exaggerating. The machines in the world of Horizon can call down lightning bolts, they have flamethrowers, they have massive explosives, they can shoot these massive spinning saw blade discs that are like the size of a small car. Some of them are invisible. Some of them can dig underground into bedrock and shit and then come up from below and fuck you up. They can shoot shrapnel and large spears and all sorts of different crazy things, all of which is going to do perfectly fine damage against Titus. And one of the things that is surprisingly going to really hold Titus back here is that he's kind of a really massive target and he's really not all that agile. Now, let me be clear. I'm saying he's not agile, not that he's not fast. He doesn't actually run all that fast. If you play the game, you see pretty clearly how slow he is, but the fact that he's so tall means he actually is going relatively fast. He's running at the speed of like a slow car when he runs, but he's still this hulking big dude that rolls slow and kind of moves slow, and he's just not the fastest guy. And when you see these massive machines in Horizon just flinging themselves around stupidly fast, faster than any normal human can, it makes it pretty clear that he's probably going to have a decent amount of trouble fighting against these things. At least the bigger ones, he sure as shit will. You also have the fact that much like Boba Fett, once he runs out of ammunition in his guns, he's got no way of actually replenishing that ammunition. So it's basically just going to be him and his chainsword. And I just can't help talking about this without thinking, God damn, this is a cool premise. I would watch this show. Imagine an entire show about a space marine that crash lands down on a planet, losing all of his technology and weapons except for his chainsword, and then essentially has to survive on a planet that no one's even aware is there, that's just covered with a bunch of giant robot dinosaurs. And it's basically like a sci-fi Conan the Barbarian with this space marine having to fight off a bunch of machine creatures on a world that he can't escape off of. Ah, man, it's fucking cool. But then the question becomes, can this space marine, specifically Titus, survive on this world? Flip a coin, really? I don't think it's impossible that he couldn't. Like, even the largest guys, like the Thunderjaws, which are like 4 or 5 story tall giant dinosaurs with all kinds of weapons on their side and shit, he could possibly overcome it with a fuck ton of difficulty, but I mean, he still can. It's one of those situations where the thing he's fighting against is clearly more powerful than he is, but he does have the skill, knowledge, and means to overcome it if he plays his cards right. The only question that comes up then is, will he actually play his cards right? I think he will for a certain amount of time. I think it's one of those situations where the longer he's on the planet, the higher chances that he'll die comes up. Like, it's just inevitable. He can't survive forever. Eventually, one of these motherfuckers is gonna kill him, whether it's the giant Thunderbird or the Thunderjaw or that giant alligator robot, the Snapmaw, one of those. Like, what if he's walking by one day and one just jumps up, grabs him, pulls him underwater and eats him? Like, there are things on this planet that can absolutely destroy him, and with great struggle he can overcome them. So I would say, I don't know, if he had to survive for like a couple weeks, he'll be fine. I think if it's a couple of months, he'll be fine, but it'll be more difficult. If it's over the course of several years, it's going to become far more difficult for him, and just a matter of time before he's defeated. So yeah, that's basically my answer. It depends how long he's on the planet for. And the reason why I'm saying this and why he can't just like chill in a town somewhere is because in the Horizon universe, everybody here are very heavily religious, and they're not religious towards the Emperor of Mankind, which means Titus will see every single person that lives on this planet as a heretic and will be an enemy of his. So he actually won't have a safe haven to go to at any point. He may actually kill them all for being heretics. So just due to his personality and religious beliefs, it'll basically make it so that he has no choice but to be out in the wilderness with the fucking robots and shit. So he's not even gonna have the Boba Fett option of just like chilling and having a quiet life somewhere. Last up, but certainly not least, we have Kraven the Hunter from Marvel Comics. And I'm not gonna lie, I hate doing Marvel Comics. Everything is so inconsistent. Sometimes Kraven the Hunter can dodge light, sometimes he's threatened by bullets, sometimes he's threatened by a regular dude with a knife. It's all over the place. So anytime I do any Marvel character whatsoever, I kind of have to take what he is most of the time, because there literally isn't a character in Marvel that doesn't have at least one or two moments where they clearly do some shit that is way beyond their capability. Having said that, if we take what his normal capability is, he'll do fine. Every single weakness that the other three characters on this list have, he in some way overcomes it. All of Boba Fett's limitations, where once all his weapons and ammo are used up, he's basically fucked because he has no real knowledge of building his own weapons and shit. Kraven does that shit all the time. Unlike someone like the Predator, Kraven does not have tech expertise, but he has been showing preparing himself for certain hunts and doing what he needs to do and creating things he needs for those particular hunts. He's the type of character who would go and kill a smaller machine and then use the parts from that smaller machine to create a spear of some kind so he can more easily fight the bigger ones. He's that type of character. The Predator actually has all the skill and tech it would need to take on the machines, but is physically just not up to par and is limited by sight as well as its own culture that sort of forces it into situations that it's not prepared for. Kraven will also be compelled to hunt the most powerful of these beings, but he won't be forced into it unless he knows he's gonna win and unless he's ready to actually dive in and do it. The Predators are actually honor bound to not have the hunt be too one-sided. That's not the case for Kraven. And unlike someone like Titus, who is a massively strong being who is capable of damaging all of the machines with ease as long as he has his chain sword, but is very hulking and lacks agility as well as a way of recuperating its ammunition once its guns are empty, Kraven doesn't have any of those problems. Strength-wise, they should be relatively comparable if Kraven's not even a little bit stronger, except Kraven is far faster, far more agile, is absolutely capable of damaging all of the machines, and can create whatever weapons he needs to fight whatever machines he's going up against. I mean, this is a dude who fought against Spider-Man. Spider-Man would dance around Titus like he's not even moving. People will often talk about comic book characters who are basically unstoppable when it comes to prep time, and when they talk about these characters, they talk about Batman and Dr. Doom and other characters like that, you know, the names you've heard 1,000 times. No one really ever talks about Kraven the Hunter, but they should, because it's literally built into his character. He's a hunter. He plans out his hunt, he knows who he's going for, he understands his enemy, and he prepares accordingly so that he can overcome it. And his stories are often him overcoming beings and creatures who are significantly larger and more powerful than himself. So much like Titus, do I think that Kraven is more powerful than, say, a Thunderjaw in Horizon? No, not even close. It's stronger, it's more durable, it's all that. Having said that, Kraven's whole thing is overcoming things that are stronger than himself. I mean, technically, Spider-Man's stronger than himself. And they had a whole story about him fucking up Spider-Man in Kraven's Last Hunt. This is what he does. He will absolutely love this planet. If anything, after being here for a couple of months or a couple of years, he'll probably get bored and want a bigger challenge once he gets used to hunting the machines that are already here. Honestly, I really don't see any world where Kraven doesn't survive this. So yeah, in summary, Boba Fett gets murder raped. Predator has the skills necessary, but he's kind of lacking in a couple of areas that he needs, like physical ability and sight. Titus is strong enough to take them on, but with great challenge, and he's a little too big and lumbering to not get hit by attacks relatively often. And Kraven's an all-arounder that has the strengths of all of the others combined, as well as a bunch of other stuff that none of them really have. But that's going to be all for me. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, share, and join the membership. Remember, if you join the membership, you get videos early. Also, don't forget, Saturday nights at 7 p.m. we have a stream, weekly streams. Come on, check out the streams. You can join the voice chat. You can have a conversation with me, and, you know, join the party and shit. It's fun. And always remember, y'all stay safe out there, you hear?